you've sat through 9 gazillion polling presentations. What are sort of your signs when you're evaluating a poll, or questions that you like to ask, or if you're a poker player, a tell that you want to push a little bit on the assumptions in the poll? We're cable, so we can swear. Like, what's your bullshit indicator, right?
I think that part of it is who you're working with, and having a really good rapport with your consultants that are doing the polling for you is incredibly important. It has to be a trusted relationship, and you genuinely have to want the real answer, not the one that looks good or is good for fundraising. And a lot of times, there are some times where you want the answer that you want, and you write the question so you get the answer you want, and you use that for whatever you need. And then there are other times when you genuinely want to know. So a lot of the polling that people release publicly is with the answer that they wanted to see, and we hold a little closer to our vest the things that haven't delivered the results that we want to see.
So let's say you're a campaign manager in a House race, okay? And I'm the pollster, and I come to you and I say, 3 days before the election, we're up 5, and I sampled 1,000 likely voters. So before you spend your win bonus, what are some, and before you go tell the candidate that we're going to win, what are a couple questions you might ask me?
Well, so I'm assuming we're up 5 and we weren't before.
It was close and it popped.
And then it's popped. So who did it pop with? Where did we move? And what moved them? And if they can't answer those questions, that's not super helpful. Because you want to know where, did all of a sudden single women under 30 start saying they're going to turn out? Or did single women under 30 start saying that they prefer my candidate over the other candidate? Like, where did we move?
It's really interesting because I'm more nerdy than you, but you're also
Yes.
pretty nerdy, is the truth. But what you're saying is, if you look at the cell and it just doesn't make sense that you had movement, or if you weren't talking to those people, and those are the ones that popped. Is that a tell?
Yeah, well, even if it makes sense, that's like actually when you want to ask the most questions. And what I try to do is not share my assumptions beforehand, holding those and then seeing if it lines up. That's always a good thing. And if it's completely different, figuring out and then talking about it with the pollster. And they can usually dig deeper into the data and do some further analysis. If you say, what about that? Like, what about that group is happening? What's happening with that group here? Depending on how long your survey is, too. I mean, it depends on how many questions you asked, how long you've been tracking these people for. But for the most part, you want to know that they're telling you the truth. And no one wins by having a poll that isn't accurate 3 days before an election. That doesn't benefit anyone. So,
well, and
unless you're doing a crazy last minute fundraising,
right? And then you do these PAC memos, which says never did it. But working a little bit more with this scenario, we're going to talk about, or depending when you're watching this, I've already talked about likely electorates. You and I are nice people, so we care about everybody, but when we're in campaign mode, we really don't care about everybody. And it's not only we don't care about registered voters, we care about people who we think
are definitely going to vote. This is why I work in the do-gooder space now. I now care about everyone else.
You now care about everyone. But talk to me a little bit about that, because I bet that's a lot of the variance that you see in polling.
Well, so I started this by saying that polling gets a bad rap, especially after 2016, but there was nothing wrong with the polls in 2016 in terms of people's preference. What was wrong was who was actually going to show up and make up the share of the electorate. And so that was the piece that people vastly overestimated how many young people and people of color were going to come out to vote. I suspect they're underestimating it now, which is great. But that is, I think, where polling can't tell you completely who's coming out and who's not coming out. That is the job of the campaign. And so when you talk about how do you allocate resources, of course you want to spend your money on making sure people you know are with you show up for you on election day. That is the number one thing you want to do to make sure you win. And then the second thing is people who are on the fence about you, that you lock them in. People who are on the fence about you, but you know they're going to show up on election day. So that's those independents who vote in every single election, and they're coming whether you want them there or not, and you won't need to spend your resources making sure that they show up for you. And so because of that, and the campaigns have such a finite, limited amount of resources, there is a very clear end time to each campaign. There's not a lot of time. People focus on those groups, and for the most part, leave out the rest of America who do have people in the nonprofit space focusing on them and trying to increase participation. But a campaign, and I've never begrudged a campaign for this, like they don't have the money or the time to go after people who, take a 25-year-old anywhere in America who didn't bother to show up in 2016. That is a hard sell for 2018, and the campaigns don't have time or money for that.